All right, and welcome to Fast Break Breakfast, NBA podcast. My name is Keith Parrish, and I'm here once again for the first time in a long time with the legend Caitlin Cooper. Caitlin, welcome back. Also, first of all, congratulations on all the success you've had since the last time you were on my show. From my perspective, it seems like you're blowing up. So what's it like to be huge?
First of all, thank you for having me back. It has been a while. I'm wearing my company branded attire to show how devoted I am
Can I
to this
tell you
program.
that I was pulling up my notes, which was a Google document on what we're going to talk about, which again, I like to do random podcasting in honor of the Pacers random offense where I don't really schedule out anything. We're not calling plays. But I did have my notes up. I actually hadn't even looked at like the Zoom video to see you're wearing a Fast Break Breakfast t-shirt. I'm so proud. This is how you feel when Tyrese Haliburton wears your merch. I'm having the same feeling right now. I'm wearing a John Conchar jersey. That's in honor of Indiana.
That's right. I mean, the Grizzlies do have a lot of Indiana representation, so I
We have a little bit
appreciate it.
less now. I think Desmond Bain had a connection. He's gone. Uh,
That's true.
RIP. No, what's it like being
And
huge,
Jake
Caitlin?
LaRavia as well.
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
Forgot about
I
that.
still think I'm fairly niche.
Yeah.
It was very nice that the Indiana Pacers went to the NBA Finals. That certainly helped my overall visibility, I suppose, when
Yeah.
only your team plays to the final day of the season. That's typically pretty helpful.
I have been begging the Grizzlies to do that to help me out, and they refuse. They flatly refuse. I'm like, this would be great for me if you guys can make the finals like once, but no, they haven't done it so far.
If only they could stay healthy, that would also, I think, be helpful. A few less injury reports.
Maybe. Can I tell you, we got to get into a lot of stuff. We actually have to talk about breakfast. People have been yelling at me for not talking about breakfast. I'll say I went through a lot of emotions as a basketball fan watching the unbelievable run of the Indiana Pacers. As a kid, I loved the Pacers. Like they were one of the teams I cheered for. Part of that was because I always cheered against like Michael Jordan. So like I'm pulling for, Reggie Miller, and then like I'm cheering against the Lakers, so I'm pulling for those like Jalen Rose, all that. But there was some form of jealousy I had as like a Grizzlies fan, where I'm like, listen, the Pacers, they had a worse net rating than the Grizzlies last year. And so I'm like, in my mind, they were not a contender. And here they are winning round after round. And I'm like, why not me? But then I got over the jealousy and I was just super excited because I guess when they faced it off with the Knicks, I'm like, my whole life, I'm always cheering against the big markets. So then I was able to lock in, enjoy the run. And then I was brokenhearted when they came up just short, but it was an unbelievable run. Um, Before we do your breakfast, the thing I've been wondering for the longest time, when did you, as a Pacers expert and lifelong fan, when did you realize or think they could win the title or at least make the finals?
Just overall as a contender, I started feeling a lot more confident when they beat Boston on the road around January because Tyrese tied his season high for points in the paint in that game. And obviously Boston tries to run teams off the three-point line because of the variance that they want to get. But Tyrese was a lot more relentless. His athleticism looked like it was back where it needed to be. And I was like, this is turning the corner. Then when they had the 2-game mini series against Cleveland and Tyrese, ironically, ended up having a tweak of his hamstring and didn't play in the second half of that game. Watching their ball pressure defense and the effect that they had against Donovan Mitchell and Darius Garland, I was like, this is something. And then obviously the March Madness run that they had where they just kept finding different improbable ways to win convinced me. But the actual one crystallized moment where I thought that they could be an NBA Finals team actually wasn't a game that they played in. So game 5 of the Celtics-Knicks series,
Mm-hmm.
after Jason Tatum had blown his Achilles, I was watching the Knicks that altered how the Celtics played. And the Celtics were running, they had to stack more actions. There was a little bit more movement in their offense. And the Knicks were really switching for kind of the first time. Like they did very little switching during the regular season. I don't think you oftentimes want to be doing something for the first time in the playoffs, but I was watching their switches and I was like, there's a lot of confusion out there in this
Mm-hmm.
game 5. The Celtics ended up pulling off that win before the Knicks took them out in 6. And I was just like, I don't think over a 7-game series that the Knicks are going to be able to defend the way that the Indiana Pacers play. I was very confident that they were going to win that series. I picked them in 6, and then they went to the NBA Finals. So it was actually watching how they defended the Celtics without Jason Tatum that convinced me they were a finals team.
But somewhere in there, I think you have to bake in the fact that you guys were rocking the Cavaliers at that point. Like the fact that you guys were taking care of business, because that was shocking. I mean, NBA, maybe not to you. I guess that's more of what I want to know, because nationally that was shocking. When you look at like the betting lines of that series, Cavaliers against the Pacers, that's one of the bigger upsets we've had in a playoff series. So going into that, if you can remember back going into the Pacers Cavaliers series, like what was your confidence level at that point?
It was actually fairly high. I did a mailbag podcast with Samson at the end of the regular season, and somebody was like, are the Pacers a guaranteed second round out against, at the time, most people thought either Cleveland or Boston. And I said, I liked their bracket. I liked that they were playing the Bucks and that they were playing the Cavs in the second round. And because of what I had seen in that 2-game miniseries back in January and how their defense really affected Cleveland. And then to the Pacers' credit, they almost changed a lot of what they did defensively. Cleveland was averaging fewer passes in that series than the 30th ranked team in the NBA. The Pacers, because they effectively pulled back all of their nail help, it pulled back the wheel action that the Memphis Grizzlies also run, that the Cavs run a lot around their pick and roll. That wasn't effective for the Cavs anymore. So it was kind of like funnel tons of usage to Donovan Mitchell. Hope that he runs out of gas at the end of games, which he did several times. Obviously, he ended up injuring his ankle. Darius Garland's toe situation was worse than I think a lot of people thought, because he ended up having surgery, and I still don't think he's necessarily ready to play right now. I don't know for sure, but I actually thought that they were going to win the series against Cleveland. I think that we picked them going into it. So it wasn't as shocking to me as maybe it was from the outside looking in, and especially because you talked about the net rating. The Pacers net rating, I had a meme going throughout the second half of the season where it was like, the one on the bus where the guy's looking at the sunny side and the dark side. Mm-hmm. When the Pacers were playing good basketball teams, they had one of the best offensive ratings in the NBA against like Boston, OKC, Cleveland. They were struggling against the lottery teams. So in terms of their contender status, that was kind of emboldening me to a degree.
That's interesting. They're the exact mirror image of the Grizzlies. The Grizzlies just destroyed every bad team they played last year and then had a horrible record against good teams. Okay, now let's go back to the start where we should have started this show. Your breakfast, Caitlin. You are beyond being a blogging, podcasting expert, you have some passions. I feel like the outshine bars and then the Pop Tarts. Has there been any advances in the technology in the last couple of years with those two products?
I mean, most recently I made a popsicle. Samson had kept saying on our podcast that I needed to watch the movie The Princess Bride, and I had never seen it. So in the off season, I promised everybody I would watch it. So I made a Princess Bride themed popsicle that, of course, was blue lemonade with gummy worms to try to mimic the shrieking eels that are in that film. So that obviously was, I did it for science. Clearly a big time advancement in the popsicle realm.
Well, now that you've brought us here, what were your thoughts on
the movie or the
Princess Bride? No, I'm more about the movie. This is for me, it's an all-time childhood classic. Got to show it to my kids in the last year or two, and they loved it as well. The violence at the end, a little bit too much for my 7-year-old. But
that did get pretty intense.
There's a lot of blood for a funny kids movie.
I appreciated the snappy banter quite a lot for similar reasons to why I like this podcast. Samson knows me well in terms of what dialogue I like. So, lines like "have fun storming the castle" and the irreverence they had for their own genre, I found quite endearing.
That's really good. All right. So, and the popsicle was fine?
I mean, I don't really probably recommend freezing gummy worms. As you can imagine, they get quite hard.
I would tell you as a candy expert, the gummy candies, which are my favorites, they shouldn't get cold. You don't even want to refrigerate them. You don't want them to be or anything cold. Because they get rock hard. And hard to deal with. What about the Pop Tart landscape? Anything
Tell
out
you what,
there? When's the last time?
oh, I have a bone to pick with the Pop Tart company.
Let's go.
The brown sugar unfrosted Pop Tarts have become impossible to find, which are clearly, when you power rank Pop Tarts, number one on the list.
Yes.
And they're not at my grocery stores anymore. You can't find the unfrosted brown sugar cinnamon Pop Tarts. You can
This
find the
is
frosted ones, but not the
yet
unfrosted.
yet another example of America's real decline. Just the society crumbling around us. Can't Kellogg, what are you doing?
I mean,
This
the
is
unfrosted ones in general are hard to find.
this is
Probably because
horrifying.
I mean, not everybody knows this, but the unfrosted ones are actually less healthy than the frosted ones in
Oh,
terms of
really?
caloric intake. Yes, because the crust has to be thicker because they don't have the icing on the top. So because the crust is thicker, they actually are higher in calories. So maybe
This is
that's why they're not
amazing.
on the shelves.
That is more shocking than the Pacers taking the Thunder to 7 games. I'll be honest. Whew.
I mean, if you ask people questions ahead of time, like which thing do they know or would they predict? The Pacers in a game seven of the NBA Finals or which Pop Tart is more healthy? I'm guessing that more people would
Ha!
get the Pop Tart question wrong.
Yeah, that's a good point. Let's go back to the Pacers because again, I wanna really luxuriate in this. I if I call it miraculous, that feels maybe insulting to some degree, but I still would like to. I like continually emphasizing how rare this occasion was because throughout my whole lifetime, your lifetime, usually the teams that make it to the finals, there's like a short list every season where you're like one of these handful of teams. And the way the regular season went, I think in the East, we're just like, yeah, the Celtics are amazing. And I have a couple Celtics friends in my life who, like, one of them, he would ask me, like, oh, we lost to a horrible team. I'm like, who cares? The Celtics are amazing. Like, it's the regular season. It doesn't matter. But then we saw them start to stumble against the Knicks even before Tatum's injury. And so, like, them fading away, the Cavaliers, again, getting run out of the gym by you guys, made it so remarkable. But then the showdown with the Thunder, was this just a team for the Pacers? Do you think it was a team that just was actually getting better and better and better month by month? Was it more of a magical run? Like, how do you explain, I guess, what happened throughout the season where the Pacers started the year at one point, and then by the time June rolled around, they were this juggernaut?
I mean, I think it was a little bit of both. I made a joke at the time that watching the Pacers over the back end of that season and throughout the playoffs is a little bit like, a corny, cheesy Christmas movie where they're like, in order to save Christmas, we have to have more belief. And then that powered them a little bit more. It was almost like every time they pulled off, Tyrese had his latest clutch shot or what, Obi Toppin's falling into the corner, making a three against the
Yeah.
Timberwolves during the regular season. It was almost like it was hard for them to believe that they wouldn't be able to come back and pull off a win because they had done it so many times, which is something that TJ almost kind of alluded to in his one most recent Players Tribune article. So I think there's certainly some of that, but part of what was allowing them to get back into those games, which I think went maybe under discussed a little bit, is like almost every one of those clutch shots by Tyrese was preceded by a clutch stop from Andrew Nemhard. And a lot of times those teams stopped having timeouts available to them to try to course correct during those situations because of the Pacers ball pressure defense,
Mm-hmm.
because coaches were blowing timeouts because they couldn't get the ball inbounds. And I think probably two things, like I don't believe in the grand theory of basketball in terms of like, oh, how is the rest of the NBA going to mimic the Oklahoma City Thunder or the Indiana Pacers so that they can play like them? I think that's pretty debunked by the fact that, the last seven champions look nothing like each other at all. But in the sense that the NBA's highest average pickup point was last year after the Pacers played more ball pressure possessions than any team in Synergy's like 12-year database in the playoffs, or I should say second spectrum's 12-year database. The rest of the NBA started mimicking that. There's a lot more ball pressure going on in the NBA at this point in time over last season. And then also like the roster construction, which is something that Rick kind of talked about a little bit on the podcast on the clip that I put onto Twitter for him, that like the idea that you have to have deeper rosters. Of course, it helps when you have Tyrese Haliburton and Pascal Siakam as your two top players, but having, 10 to 11 rotation players enabled them to play the high tempo style offensively, as well as their ball pressure defensively, more so than having two guys who get all the touches. The Pacers are a very quick decision making team. I think when you look at like their average touch time as a team, it was the highest in the last 5 years. They were second in passes per 100 possessions last season. It's very much a hot ball offense, and I think that some of those are things that the rest of the NBA might be looking at as to why the Pacers were able to advance in the way that they were.
Yeah, I'm almost certain the Grizzlies are going to continue trying to mimic the ball pressure. Like I think they're going to pick up full court a lot next year. They're doing that a lot in summer league. They tried it. They did it some last year. But yeah, I do think a lot of people are trying to replicate the Pacers. I also think, and this is funny, I guess, like both the Thunder and the Pacers, it's going to be hard for teams to point to those rosters as like, oh yeah, we should do it that way too. You know, we're like the Thunder, a very unique situation with the return from the Paul George trade, being able to tank a couple years while Shea was still amazing, and they ended up getting, you know, I have argued that like they could have done it without tanking because like the Jalen Williams pick was the most important. Chet Holmgren, very important. Of course, they tanked for that one. But like the Thunder's hard to replicate. The Pacers one, I honestly feel it might be bad for small market teams to point to, like where the owners or the GMs can point to the Pacers and be like, see, look, they don't go into the tax. They traded for a couple of guys. I mean, trading for your guys, I feel like the Knicks and the Pacers, I'm in awe of how they built their teams because they didn't do it maybe the traditional way. Like it wasn't drafted guys. It was mainly we identified players to go and trade for or sign in free agency. And then like the free agent signings that like getting Neesmith, what an incredible get. And then Nimhard, like that working out, you know, like it seems hard to replicate that, you know, to bring in an Obi Toppin and like have all your salaries fit just perfectly. Although I know, and again, my worry is now every smaller market team is going to say, we don't need to pay the tax. We can be the Pacers.
Or the fact that maybe the draft is less important to an extent because when the Pascal
Yeah.
Siakam trade happened and the return got put out there, you know, obviously the Raptors got several first round picks from the Pacers, but at the time I was like, oh, they got Pascal without giving up Andrew Nembhard, Benedict Mathurin, Jarris Walker, you know, any of their recent high lottery in picks or Andrew Nembhard. And I was like, I don't like this is probably going to sound a little bit blunt, but like I don't really care that they gave up those picks because when you look at their recent draft
Yeah.
history, the only players that they've signed to second-year contracts since Myles Turner are Andrew Nembhard and now Isaiah Jackson coming off an Achilles injury. Like if you look at the rest of what those picks were, it's a pretty spotty record, but they've been tremendous with their pro scouting department and identifying players, like you said, with Aaron Neesmith, with Obi Toppin, of guys that, you know, might not have worked out in their previous situations, whether because of roster crunch or the style of play, who could really elevate their games with the Pacers and shine in a different way that maybe they previously haven't. So they've largely built this, you know, looking at their starting lineup, it's almost entirely trades other than the fact that Myles Turner had been there for 10 years. And then obviously they drafted Andrew as well high in the second round, but it's not really a roster built through the draft that much.
Is Jay Huff the next player they identified or that they want to
the diamond in the
soar?
Huff?
Yeah. well done. Yeah, if Jay Huff absolutely destroys in the Indiana, I guess I'll be sad, but I wasn't that broken up about it. Let's actually talk about Myles Turner, and we'll do that after a quick break. All right, Caitlin. So after the thrilling run to the finals, of course, there's the devastating Haliburton injury in Game 7. And then going into the offseason, there's this question of whether or not Myles Turner comes back. And in a sort of surprising twist, the Bucks waive and stretch Damian Lillard to acquire him in free agency. And if you believe what the front office said from the Pacers, they didn't anticipate this coming. What are your thoughts on Myles Turner? I'm guessing he was easily the longest tenured Pacer. What are your thoughts on Myles Turner moving on after the season and going to the rival Bucks?
When I recorded the end of the season podcast, somebody had asked, like, what do you think about Myles Turner being extended after his performance in the Eastern Conference Finals and the finals? And my opinion was kind of that maybe the Tyrese injury opened up the possibility that both sides might have slight change of heart. From the Pacers' perspective, it sounds like they intended to re-sign him, other than the fact that, like you said, they got surprised by the fact that the Bucks suddenly cleared enough cap space to make what offer that they made to him. But I do think that there's something there in terms of Myles Turner was very good for them in the regular season and even the early rounds of the playoffs. But going back to the Eastern Conference Finals a year ago against Boston, looking at that Knicks series, looking at the Thunder series, he had more turnovers in those series than he had made three-pointers,
Mm-hmm.
which is problematic. Against Boston a year ago, he led the team in turnovers. And some of that goes to the fact that the Boston Celtics were cross-matching Jason Tatum onto Myles Turner for a large portion of that series. There were times where Derek White was successful at standing him up in the post and kind of, even blocking him once in the post against autopilot post moves. Boston and OKC defend very differently, but in terms of both of their abilities to do cross-matching and switching without him necessarily punishing it, it was really there. And OKC was always going to be a series that was going to be more difficult for Tyrese because it's kind of the antithesis of how he plays in terms of their ability to really take away the paint and how much they load up at the elbows and the blocks. In order to crack that, Tyrese wasn't getting into the paint any more often. In fact, it was slightly less often with Myles on the floor than off the floor, despite the fact that people see him as like the prototypical stretch five. It wasn't necessarily stretching OKC's defense. And if he got a switch on Shea, it wasn't like he was using a quick swim move to punish it. At the same time, he's not necessarily a guy who has a lot of screen craft. And that's fine during the regular season because Tyrese is one of the leaders in, screen rejections per 100 possessions. He doesn't use a lot of screens. But when you're playing a very handsy physical defense like OKC, he needed that. And it's very easy to see the ways that Tyrese enhances Myles Turner's game. It hasn't always been as clear to see the way that Myles Turner enhances Tyrese's game, and that may matter even more when Tyrese eventually comes back from this Achilles injury. So I was probably a little bit different than the fan base at large in terms of the fact that I thought that this season kind of presents the Pacers with an opportunity to perhaps take a step back to
Mm-hmm.
later take a bigger step forward, potentially with a different center who can help them in some of those later rounds of the playoffs in ways that Myles just didn't over the last 2 years. And there is some stuff there because I know he was slightly dealing with, back spasms in game 4 against Boston, and he was sick at one point during the finals against the Thunder, but that doesn't fully explain some of the rebounding stuff against the Knicks and just some different ways where I think that they need a little bit of an upgrade at that position overall. So it was very surprising that the Milwaukee Bucks stretched Damian Lillard and that is what team Myles Turner went to. And I don't think it's exactly, tremendous asset management that he ended up walking for nothing, despite that surprise that they weren't able to do a sign and trade with some other team or even with the Bucks to try to get something in return. But I can't see a path forward where they could eventually, make an upgrade at that position that actually helps Tyrese in ways that weren't necessarily here the last 2 seasons.
Yeah, I understand how it could benefit the Pacers long term, but it also fits so clearly into the box of like, oh, of course they weren't going to pay Myles Turner because that was the criticism going in, where it's like, oh, the Pacers actually made the finals, so maybe now they'll finally pay the luxury tax to keep Myles Turner, and then it's like, oh, what a big surprise. They actually didn't do it. And I know, of course, there's extenuating circumstances. The Haliburton injury does perhaps give permission where everyone like, oh, you know what? I get it now. Like that kind of makes sense. Looking at his stats from the finals and the conference finals, like you said, he averaged 2 turnovers and 1 3-pointer made per game. I'll say, as someone who doesn't watch the Pacers every game in the regular season, but in the playoffs, I'm watching them game by game. One of the most common things I was talking to with other basketball fans was like, is Myles Turner okay? Because he seemed so slow and he wasn't shooting very well in those series. Now that Myles is gone and with the Haliburton injury, what are the expectations for this season? There's still a lot of talent on the roster, but there's the gaping hole that Haliburton filled. And also, how many games were swung just on miracle Haliburton plays? It's like there feels like a pretty high number. So what are the Pacers doing for this upcoming year?
I think your answer is probably as good as mine. I think that they're going to start the season, I'm sure, trying to be as competitive as possible coming off what run they just had. We'll see how that goes, but it's a little bit hard for me to project because if you look to the start of last season when they got to the point of the break for the NBA Cup, which they weren't in because they lost all 4 of their Cup games, they were 10-15 at that point. They ranked 19th offensively, 19th defensively, And when you look at the reason why, a lot of the fingers, for lack of better terms, can be pointed at the fact that Tyrese wasn't himself over that stretch of play. Their offense was very much impacting why their defense was as poor as it was, in addition to the fact that Andrew Nembhard and Aaron Nesmith, who were two of their best point of attack defenders, along with Ben Shepherd, just weren't available. That certainly wasn't helpful. But their turnover rate was much higher. Once they cut back on the turnovers, once they were making more shots, once their offense got back to being what their offense is capable of being with Tyrese, their defense followed hand in hand. Because, when you make more shots and you aren't turning the ball over, it's easier to set your ball pressure defense. So both things, ended up feeding into each other in a way where it was like a vicious negative feedback loop over those first roughly 25 games. So when I look at that, I know over those series of games that, like, yeah, Tyrese wasn't himself, but Tyrese was still on the court. And a lot of teams were still face guarding him 94 feet, including the Memphis Grizzlies, where, like, I'm watching them play possessions 4-on-4 repeatedly that are opening things up for Andrew Nembhard and Pascal Siakam just by virtue of Tyrese standing on the basketball court. So I'm really wondering, what does all of that look like? How does the gravity and the tension in the defense change when Tyrese not only, it's not just going to be limited Tyrese, it's going to be no Tyrese. So, I mean, I think that they already know how valuable he was to the franchise. I think they're going to find it out a little bit more when he isn't playing. And certainly, like, this isn't completely new for Pascal. He's been a number one option before, and he's been a number one option in a very cramped half-court offense for the Toronto Raptors with, Jakob Poeltl and Scotty Barnes and Dennis Schroeder running point. So he knows how to be, a piece of paper that can slide through a crack in the door. I'm not overly concerned about him and him potentially seeing more defenders as a number one option. But I think the biggest question that I have in all of this is, who is the Andrew Nembhard for Andrew Nembhard? Because I don't have doubt of Andrew Nembhard's guile running the pick and roll. And there were games last year, there were even series where Andrew Nembhard ran more pick and roll against the Cleveland Cavaliers than Tyrese did, because Isaac Okoro and Max Strus were face guarding Tyrese to the degree that he was. But again, that's Andrew getting to run pick and roll 4-on-4 with Tyrese practically spacing out to the logo, not doing it while, 2-game miniseries last year, Andrew Nembhard's playing the Atlanta Hawks, Tyrese is out. Dyson Daniels is guarding Andrew for an entire game and ducking under every screen because Andrew doesn't take a lot of pull-up threes. And then at the other end, Andrew's still having to guard Trae Young, and he's picking Trae Young up 50 feet. Like, I don't know another point guard, maybe you can think of one off the top of your head, who is going to get asked next season, hey, you're going to be our primary ball handler. There's not really going to be another ball handler in the starting lineup, as there was with Tyrese and Andrew a year ago. And you're going to guard the other team's best player, and you're also going to apply 50 feet of pressure every possession that you do it. That's a really big ask.
That's a hard ask. I'm racking my brain. I can't think of it.
And if people, just to add on, if people remember the NBA Finals, Game 5, Andrew looked completely gassed because Tyrese had injured his calf in that game. Tyrese was basically just a decoy. He's running all the offense, and he's guarding Shea, and he's picking him up. Andrew ends up having like 3 turnovers in the fourth quarter, and the big adjustment the Pacers made after that game was, hey, we're going to pull back the full court pressure and try to, surprise OKC by picking them up at, half court 3-point line rather than full court, and try to preserve Andrew Nembhard to run offense. It worked very well for them. And every game isn't going to be Game 5 against OKC, but the Pacers are going to have to find a way that every game isn't Game 5 against OKC for Andrew Nembhard, because I believe in him as a player, but a very, very big ask.
Yeah, I mean, it also seems cool in a way as NBA fans that we actually get to see, obviously the circumstances are very poor with the Haliburton injury, but it is cool to see Nembhard have a chance to be like, oh, can he run his own team? Is he legit, like one, starting point guard in the league? I would say looking at the East, and like it would make sense. You're like, oh, we have this Achilles injury to our best player, and we're losing Myles Turner. You could imagine from an asset management long-term play to be like, this is a gap year. But then when I look at the Pacers roster, I'm like, you guys are better than a lot of the, like you're still way better than a lot of the East with Siakam there and Nembhard and Nesmith and Mathurin, who Rick Carlisle revealed on your podcast that he's going to be starting this season. Like the Pacers are still, I think I'd be surprised if they don't make the postseason. I feel like they'd have to make a conscious decision to try to avoid the postseason. So like, how do you think they stack up in this, again, a very bizarre East where we don't know what we're getting from the Celtics, and there's just a lot of kind of question marks, maybe outside of like the Cavaliers and the Knicks?
Yeah, I mean, the Pacers and the Celtics are in somewhat similar situations in that they're both going to be navigating and having to find new styles, perhaps new ways to win with their best player out with these Achilles injuries. So it's kind of difficult to project what either of them will do. For me, like maybe this is me being too optimistic with blue and gold glasses on, but I think it's kind of win-win for them, honestly. Because if they do make the postseason, that's going to tell me that either Andrew or Benedict Mathurin or somebody else on the roster took a really big step forward, or maybe they're in a better position with their center by committee approach than people are anticipating that they're going to be. And if they don't, then they're getting a lottery pick in a year that Tyrese didn't play in. So, like, either way, but I'm with you. I think that it's very possible that I would probably project them to be at the high end of the play-in tournament, and that they could get out of the play-in tournament based on the vast amount of postseason experience that the guys who are going to be playing in those games have, and just my trust in the coaching staff to be able to scheme up a way to win, one, maybe two games to get into the playoffs and then be the seventh or eighth seed, I guess is the way that I would look at it. So, yeah, I mean, Cleveland and the Knicks clearly have the most solidified paths here, where if one of those two teams doesn't make the NBA finals, or whichever one doesn't, I think that you'd probably be at the point where you need to make some pretty big changes to those rosters and look in the mirror at that point in time.
Yeah. I mean, obviously the Magic, we're expecting them to be good, but like the rest of the East, I mean,
I don't know what to make of the Sixers.
Pistons fans are hoping that they like continue to build upward, and the other Sixers, who knows? Who's better? Your Pacers or Myles Turner's Bucks? Pacers or Bucks? Which seems better?
I mean, I would probably lean towards just, Giannis is probably the best player in the Eastern Conference, and that's kind of an outdated way to look at basketball, given the things that we just talked about that Rick said about, having deeper rosters being more important. But I'll be honest enough to say, I don't know if the Bucks are going to be thrilled with paying $50 million in order to have Myles Turner on their roster for the entirety of that contract.
Right.
And this isn't me trying to necessarily throw dirt on Myles, but I did say it on Twitter, so I guess I can repeat it here. I think he was the fourth best defender in the starting lineup for the Pacers last year. I think he's an upgrade over the current version of Brook Lopez for sure, but I do not think that he's better than the version of Brook Lopez that they won a championship with. And they need him to be as good or better than the version of Brook Lopez that they won a championship with, because they really don't have a lot of point guard play on that roster. And when I talked about the ways that Tyrese and Rick Carlisle clearly enhanced Myles Turner's game, you can see it by the numbers in terms of their points per chance impact in the pick and roll with, Tyrese and Myles by comparison to what it was with Darren Collison, George Hill, everybody else they had at the point guard position.
Collison, man, yeah, sorry. that was a pull for me. Okay.
Like, there's a big change when Tyrese came to be the point guard with Myles, and they really don't have anybody. Like, are you relying on Kevin Porter Jr. to be that? Like, I'm not exactly sure. Yeah.
No,
I'm not exactly sure what happens to the Bucks when Giannis comes off the floor either. Like, what exactly are they at that point in time?
I think it might have been Michael Pena for the Ringer who was maybe really heavily emphasizing that. Like, when Giannis is off the court, the Bucks have nobody. Like, it's gonna be
is it Bobby Portis like face up shots? Like,
yeah. I gotta know. Actually, we can wrap up with this. What's your opinion on? I think this is a Nate Duncan conspiracy theory that when the Pacers made the trade to get their draft pick back, they thought there was a chance Haliburton could get hurt because they made the trade fortuitously to get their own draft pick back before Haliburton tears his Achilles. Nate Duncan was like, conspiracy theory. What if they knew something could go wrong?
I think that they did know that something could go wrong. I think that they were made aware of the risks of Tyrese continuing to play. I think that they thought it was a manageable risk. I think also it's very hard to be like, hey, Tyrese, we've seen the future. Here's a crystal ball. And if you play in game 7, you're going to tear your Achilles. You can't guarantee that for him. So when your franchise player wants to play and he just saw, hey, I played in game 6 and nothing went wrong. And in fact, I didn't even really have to play in the fourth quarter. And like, this is what I've worked my whole career for. I think it's very hard to convince that player, like, oh, we're going to save you from yourselves and not play you in a game 7. And then if they lose in the game 7, not have him looking you in the eye every day and being like, what if I had played? I think that they were in a very, very tough spot there.
It is one of the wilder conundrums you could encounter if you had the crystal ball. And if you could tell any NBA player going into the game 7 of the NBA finals that you will tear your Achilles, what do you want to do? Yeah, that is unbelievable. Where it's like, I have a chance at winning a title. And who knows if I ever get back. And so that, I don't know, that is an unbelievable.
Like, I think he was
not that was the choice, but still it's,
I think that Tyrese would still make the same choice again if he had it to do over. But that being said, I don't think that's the reason that they anticipated that and got
Yeah.
their pick back. I think it more had to do with the stipend rule and just overall, like, we don't necessarily need to have a top lottery pick right now coming off this run, so we'll kick that can ahead. They've done those types of moves in the past, so I'm not buying into the conspiracy theory on that particular one.
Gotcha. All right. Well, Caitlin, thanks so much for coming on, spending your time with me, talking about the Pacers. It's so good to have you back on the show. If you guys out there want more from Caitlin, you get it at Basketball She Wrote. Go support her Patreon, subscribe to her YouTube page. Caitlin, do I have your blessing to launch my next project, which is going to be called Basketball He Wroten, where I cover the short-lived NBA career of Tony Wroten, my guy?
Obviously, that's a great pun. I'm in favor of puns. And I
Good.
mean, you could also have a podcast called Basketball They Wrote In, and then he
Oh,
could be your co-host.
now we're talking. What a great idea. Yeah, that's my next passion project. Well, anyways, Caitlin, thanks for coming on. Listeners, you want more from me, you can get that at patreon.com/fastbreak breakfast. You guys are the best. Thanks for listening. And remember, breakfast is the most important thing.
Yeah, never apologize for being G&G. Fastbreak break, man. You understand?
I will remember.